Colorado Territory, 1875. The whisper of snowfall against the windows of Vaughn Young's cabin couldn't mask the pounding of hooves approaching through the darkness. He set down his coffee mug and reached for the Winchester propped beside the door, his 24-year-old frame tensing with caution. Nobody rode out to Willow Creek Ranch in a February blizzard unless something had gone terribly wrong. The knock came urgent and desperate. Vaughn pulled the door open, rifle at the ready, only to find himself facing a snow-covered woman who nearly collapsed into his arms. "Please," she gasped, her voice barely audible above the howling wind. "They cannot know I'm here." Her emerald eyes locked with his before she fainted, leaving Vaughn holding an unconscious stranger whose rose-scented perfume somehow cut through the bitter cold of the Colorado night. The woman was young, no more than 20 by his estimation, with auburn hair escaping from beneath a snow-dusted bonnet. Her traveling dress, though well made of deep blue wool, was soaked through. Most peculiar of all was the small leather satchel clutched in her gloved hand, the kind bankers used for important documents or valuables. Vaughn carried her to the bed and quickly stoked the fire before removing her wet bonnet and gloves. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Whoever she was, she'd ridden hard through dangerous weather to reach his isolated ranch, and the why of it gnawed at him as he prepared a pot of broth. When she finally stirred, Vaughn approached cautiously with a steaming cup. "Miss, can you tell me your name?" Her eyes flew open in alarm before focusing on him. A tall young rancher with sun-bronzed skin, honey-brown hair falling across his forehead, and a light stubble that hadn't seen a razor in a day or two. "I'm Sophia," she whispered. "Sophia Sterling." "Vaughn Young," he replied, offering the broth. "You're safe at Willow Creek Ranch, though I reckon whatever brought you here on a night like this wasn't good." She sipped the broth, her hands trembling. "Thank you for taking me in, Mr. Young." Her voice faltered. "I needed somewhere to hide." "Hiding from what, Miss Sterling?" Sophia glanced toward the window, as if expecting to see faces peering in. "I cannot say much. Only that I discovered something I wasn't meant to know." Her fingers tightened around the small satchel beside her. "Don't tell anyone I'm here," she whispered. The rancher listened, and was shaken by the raw fear in her voice. "You have my word," Vaughn said, though questions multiplied in his mind. Who was this woman? What secret could drive her into a blizzard? And why, of all places, had she sought refuge at his isolated ranch? "Rest now," he said, taking the empty cup from her hands. "We'll talk more when you're stronger." He settled into a chair by the fire, rifle across his lap, keeping watch as the storm raged through the night. Something told Vaughn Young his quiet life had just become considerably more complicated. By morning, the blizzard had passed, leaving Willow Creek Ranch blanketed in pristine white. Sophia woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, finding Vaughn at the cast-iron stove. "Good morning," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Feeling better?" She sat up, smoothing her wrinkled dress. "Yes, thank you." Her voice held the refined tones of Eastern education, nothing like the frontier women Vaughn knew. "Your horse is fed and rested in the barn," he said, placing a plate before her. "Once you've eaten, perhaps you might explain why you risked your life getting here." Sophia hesitated. "Mr. Young, Vaughn," he corrected. "Vaughn," she repeated, testing his name. "What I'm about to tell you puts you in danger merely by knowing it. Are you certain you wish to hear it?" He leaned against the table, arms crossed over his broad chest. His chambray shirt, worn at the elbows, stretched across shoulders strengthened by years of ranch work. "Miss Sterling, you arrived half-frozen on my doorstep. I reckon I'm already involved." She took a deep breath. "I was working as a governess for Harold Montgomery's family in Denver." Vaughn's expression darkened. Montgomery was the territory's most powerful banker, rumored to have politicians in his pocket and methods that skated the edges of legality. "2 nights ago, I overheard Mr. Montgomery discussing plans with another man," Sophia continued. "They spoke of falsified land records and something called Operation Watershed. They intend to dam the White Rock River and divert the water to mining operations they own." Vaughn's jaw tightened. That would dry up every small ranch and farm for 20 miles. Hundreds of families would lose everything. "Exactly. When I realized what I was hearing, I tried to leave quietly, but," her voice caught, "Mr. Montgomery saw me. I fled that night, taking these with me." She opened the satchel, revealing documents bearing the banker's seal. "These prove the conspiracy, but Montgomery's men have been pursuing me since Denver. And you came here because your name was on their list of ranchers to be ruined, Sophia explained. I remembered hearing that Willow Creek was the most remote. I thought I might reach you before they did. Vaughn poured more coffee, mind racing. That explains why Leland Harper tried buying my water rights last month. I turned him down flat. He studied her face, searching for deception, but finding only exhaustion and resolve. What's your plan now? I need to reach the territorial judge in Pine Junction with these documents, but Montgomery's men will be watching the roads. She met his gaze directly. I cannot ask for your help. You've done enough already. Vaughn glanced out the window at the snow-covered landscape. Pine Junction is 3 days' ride in good weather. In this snow, he shook his head. And you won't make it alone with Montgomery's men searching. Before Sophia could respond, they both froze at the sound of approaching riders. Vaughn moved swiftly to the window, then cursed under his breath. 3 men, heavily armed, he muttered. Get your things and head to the cellar. There's a trapdoor under the rug. As Sophia disappeared below, Vaughn arranged the bedding to hide any evidence of his visitor, then stepped onto the porch, rifle casually in hand as the riders approached. Morning, gentlemen, he called, squinting against the sun's glare on snow. Something I can help you with. The lead rider, a hard-faced man with a thick mustache and deputy's badge, dismounted. Name's Harker, Mr. Young. We're searching for a thief who stole property from Mr. Montgomery in Denver. Young woman, auburn hair, might have passed this way. Vaughn kept his expression neutral. Haven't seen anyone in days. Blizzards kept me homebound. Harker's eyes narrowed. Mind if we look around? For thoroughness. My home is private property, deputy, Vaughn replied evenly. Unless you've got a proper warrant? The men exchanged glances. We don't need warrants in pursuit of a felon, Harker said, his hand drifting toward his holster. Montgomery's offering $500 for the woman and what she took. Vaughn's grip tightened on his rifle. That's so? Seems like a lot for a simple theft. She's dangerous, Harker insisted. Killed Montgomery's houseman during her escape. The accusation hung in the air like gunsmoke. Had Sophia Sterling lied about her circumstances? Or was this another of Montgomery's fabrications? Well, Vaughn drawled, buying time to think. I'd surely remember seeing a murderous woman around these parts. Like I said, been alone through the storm. Harker studied the ranch with suspicious eyes. We'll be back, Young. Montgomery wants every ranch in this valley checked. His gaze returned to Vaughn, cold and threatening. Best you remember where your interests lie. The men departed, but Vaughn remained on the porch until they disappeared over the ridge. Only then did he return inside to release Sophia from her hiding place. They're calling you a murderer, he said as she emerged, pale and shaking. I never hurt anyone, she whispered. The houseman helped me escape. He must be the one they're blaming me for harming. She clutched the satchel tighter. You see now why I cannot stay? They'll return with more men. Vaughn paced the small cabin, weighing his options. His ranch stood to be destroyed if Montgomery succeeded. But aiding Sophia meant risking everything he'd built over the past 6 years. We'll leave at nightfall, he finally said. There's an old trapper's trail through Shadow Canyon that few know about. It's longer to Pine Junction, but safer. Relief washed over Sophia's face. Thank you, but I cannot ask. You didn't ask, Vaughn interrupted. This is my choice. My land, my water, my fight too. He began gathering supplies. Rest while you can. Tonight we ride. As Sophia watched him prepare, something shifted between them, a silent acknowledgement that their fates had become inexplicably entwined. They departed under cover of darkness, the moonlight casting blue shadows across the snow. Vaughn led them on a circuitous route away from the main trail, his years of hunting having taught him how to move without leaving obvious signs. Sophia rode beside him, wrapped in a borrowed sheepskin coat, her hair hidden beneath a worn cowboy hat. How long have you had the ranch? She asked as they navigated a narrow passage between towering pines. 6 years, Vaughn replied. Came west after the war with nothing but a horse and my brother's pocket watch. Worked cattle drives until I'd saved enough for a down payment on Willow Creek. Sophia studied his profile in the moonlight, strong jawline, straight nose, and thoughtful eyes that seemed older than his years. You built it alone? A shadow crossed his face. My wife Emma helped for a time. Yellow fever took her 3 years ago. I'm sorry, Sophia said softly. It must be lonely. It was her dream as much as mine, he said after a moment. Couldn't bear to leave it, even after. He glanced at her. What about you? How does a properly educated young woman end up a governess in Denver? It was Sophia's turn to look away. My father was a professor at Boston University. After he died, my stepmother made it clear I was no longer welcome. Teaching was one of the few respectable options for a woman without family support. And now you're riding through wilderness with a stranger, pursued by powerful men, Vaughn observed. Hardly the proper Boston life. For the first time since her arrival, Sophia smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face from merely beautiful to radiant. Perhaps I was never meant for proper Boston life, Mr. Young. They made camp before dawn in a sheltered hollow, far from any trail. As they shared a cold breakfast of jerky and biscuits, Sophia removed the documents from her satchel. You should know exactly what we're risking our lives for, she said, spreading papers across a flat rock. These are survey maps showing how the dam would redirect water. These are falsified deeds placing strategic properties in Montgomery's holding companies. And this, she held up an official-looking letter, is correspondence with a federal judge who's been bribed to rule in Montgomery's favor when legal challenges arise. Vaughn examined the documents, his expression hardening. This would destroy not just ranches, but the entire valley ecosystem. The town of Cooper's Mill wouldn't survive without that water. Exactly, Sophia nodded. Also, Montgomery's mines can use hydraulic methods to extract gold more cheaply. The profit margins are detailed here. As Vaughn studied the papers, a glint of metal caught his attention. Buried at the bottom of Sophia's satchel was a small Derringer pistol. You're armed, he observed, not accusingly but with surprise. Sophia's cheeks flushed. Mr. Montgomery's son had improper intentions toward me. His father gave me the pistol for protection, ironically enough. She met Vaughn's eyes directly. I've never fired it. The revelation hung between them, adding another layer to the mystery of Sophia Sterling. Before Vaughn could respond, the distant sound of a branch snapping brought both to alert attention. Pack up, he whispered, reaching for his rifle. Quickly, they mounted in haste, Vaughn leading them deeper into the forest as the sounds of pursuit grew closer. They rode hard through the morning, taking routes too narrow for group travel, crossing streams to obscure their trail. By midday, they had reached Shadow Canyon, a steep-walled gorge with a rushing stream at its base. The trail, little more than a game path, clung to the canyon wall with precipitous drops to their right. Stay close to the rock face, Vaughn instructed as they began the treacherous descent. One misstep here. The report of a rifle cut through his warning. The bullet struck the canyon wall inches from Sophia's head, sending stone fragments flying. Their pursuers had found them. Ride, Vaughn shouted, urging his horse forward as more shots rang out. They galloped along the narrow path, with only Vaughn's expert horsemanship keeping them from plunging over the edge. Behind them, 3 riders appeared at the canyon rim. The path widened as they reached the canyon floor, allowing greater speed but also exposing them to fire from above. Vaughn led them toward a tumble of massive boulders, the remains of an ancient rock slide that created a natural maze through the canyon. Dismounting in the shelter of the largest boulder, he helped Sophia down. We can't outrun them on this terrain, he said, checking his ammunition. We'll have to make a stand. Fear flickered in Sophia's eyes, but resolution quickly replaced it. Tell me what to do. Vaughn positioned her behind a fallen tree, showing her how to use his spare revolver. Aim lower than you think necessary, and remember, these men won't hesitate to kill you. Taking up position 20 yards away, Vaughn prepared to create a crossfire. The sounds of their pursuers grew closer, men speaking in low tones, horses' hooves on stone. When the first rider emerged around the boulder, Vaughn's shot knocked him from the saddle. The second rider wheeled his horse, firing wildly as Sophia's shot went wide. The third man, Deputy Harker, took cover behind the rocks, calling out with false authority. Young, surrender the woman and the papers, and you might survive this. You're no real deputy, Harker, Vaughn shouted back. No lawman serves a land grabber like Montgomery. The exchange of gunfire continued for tense minutes, neither side gaining advantage. Sophia, despite her inexperience, maintained steady fire that kept the men pinned down. Then Harker's voice rang out again. Perhaps you'd like to know the truth about your lady friend before you die for her, Young. Vaughn ignored the taunt, focusing on his aim, but Harker continued. Did she tell you she was Montgomery's mistress? That she stole those papers after he refused to leave his wife for her? Ask her about the jewelry in that satchel. Payment for services rendered. The accusation sliced through the gunfire. Vaughn's eyes flicked towards Sophia, whose face had gone pale with fury. Lies, she cried, her voice carrying across the canyon. Montgomery forced himself on me. The jewelry was his attempt to buy my silence. The momentary distraction was all Harker needed. He broke from cover, racing towards Sophia's position. Vaughn fired but missed, his angle blocked by the boulders. With horror, he watched Harker close in on Sophia's hiding place, revolver raised. Her scream pierced the air as Harker reached her, followed immediately by a gunshot. Vaughn charged forward, rifle raised, only to see Harker stumbling backward, a red stain spreading across his chest. Behind him stood Sophia, the derringer in her trembling hand. He was going to kill me, she whispered as Vaughn reached her. He said Montgomery ordered no witnesses. The remaining pursuer, seeing his leader fallen, fled back up the canyon on horseback. Vaughn checked Harker's body, confirming he was dead, then gently took the derringer from Sophia's shaking fingers. You saved your own life, he said softly. And mine too, likely. He hesitated, then asked the question he couldn't ignore. Was what he said true? About Montgomery. Tears filled Sophia's eyes. Not as he meant it. Montgomery attacked me the night before I fled. When I threatened to expose him, he offered jewels to buy my silence. She met Vaughn's gaze directly. I took them as evidence of his guilt, not payment. I was never his willing companion. Relief washed through Vaughn, followed immediately by shame for doubting her. I believe you, he said simply, helping her to her feet. But we need to move. That rider will bring reinforcements. They collected the horses and continued through the canyon, now burdened with the knowledge that blood had been shed, lines crossed that could never be uncrossed. Night fell as they emerged from Shadow Canyon onto rolling grassland dotted with stands of aspen. With their pursuers temporarily thrown off, they made camp beside a small spring, the horses hobbled nearby. Sophia sat wrapped in a blanket before their small fire, staring into the flames. The day's violence had left its mark. Her hands still trembled slightly when she raised her coffee cup. First time taking a life is the hardest, Vaughn said quietly, sitting beside her. I keep seeing his face, she whispered. The surprise in his eyes. It was him or you, Vaughn reminded her. There's no sin in surviving. She glanced at him. You speak from experience? Vaughn nodded slowly. Served with the 7th Michigan. Antietam, Gettysburg, Cold Harbor. Saw enough death for a lifetime. He poked at the fire with a stick. Coming west was supposed to be my fresh start. And now I've brought violence back to your doorstep, Sophia said, regret coloring her voice. Violence was already coming, Vaughn corrected. Montgomery wasn't going to ask politely for our water rights. He studied her profile in the firelight, the delicate curve of her jaw, the strength in her eyes despite her exhaustion. We should reach Pine Junction by tomorrow evening if we push hard. And then, she asked, Judge Wallace is a fair man. Once he sees these documents, he'll issue warrants for Montgomery and his conspirators. Sophia shivered despite the fire's warmth. Montgomery has powerful friends. Even with warrants, he might escape justice. Then we'll testify, Vaughn said with determination. Every rancher and farmer who'd be ruined will stand with us. Us, Sophia repeated softly. Yesterday, you didn't know I existed. Now you speak as if our fates are bound together. The simplicity of her observation struck Vaughn silent. She was right. In the span of 2 days, this woman had become inexplicably important to him. Not just her cause, but her courage, her resilience. Sometimes life changes course in an instant, he finally said. Like a river finding new channels after a storm. Their eyes met across the fire, a moment of silent understanding passing between them. Then Sophia looked away, reaching for her satchel. There's something else you should see, she said, withdrawing a folded map from a hidden compartment. I found this in Montgomery's study. It shows more than just our valley. The map revealed Montgomery's ambitions extended far beyond White Rock River, a network of dams and diversions that would control water across 3 counties, giving him unprecedented power over the territory's future development. This isn't just about gold mining, Vaughn realized. It's about controlling who can live where, Which towns survive, which fail. He looked up at Sophia with new understanding. No wonder he's willing to kill for these papers. The territorial governor needs to see this, she agreed. This goes beyond Judge Wallace's jurisdiction. As they discussed plans for the morning, the tension of the day gradually eased. Sophia's smile returned as Vaughn recounted stories of his early ranching mistakes, and he found himself captivated by her descriptions of Boston society and her father's academic world. When they finally settled to sleep on opposite sides of the fire, Vaughn found himself staring at the stars, acutely aware of Sophia's presence just a few yards away. Whatever happened in Pine Junction, he knew his life would never return to its solitary rhythm. Whether that was blessing or curse remained to be seen. Dawn broke with disorienting suddenness as Vaughn jolted awake to the sound of approaching riders. He rolled to his rifle in one fluid motion, then froze. These weren't Montgomery's men, but U.S. cavalry soldiers, a dozen strong. "On your feet," called their lieutenant, a young man whose pristine uniform suggested recent arrival from the east. "Hands where we can see them." Sophia scrambled up beside Vaughn as they were surrounded. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded. "Sophia Sterling?" the lieutenant asked. When she nodded, he continued, "You're under arrest for the murder of Calvin Harker and theft of property belonging to Harold Montgomery." "That's absurd," Vaughn protested. "Harker was trying to kill us, and those documents prove Montgomery's criminal conspiracy." The lieutenant remained impassive. "My orders come directly from the territorial governor's office. You'll both be escorted to Denver to face charges." As soldiers dismounted to bind their wrists, Sophia's eyes met Vaughn's with quiet desperation. The satchel of documents lay just inside her bedroll, mere feet away but impossible to reach. "Lieutenant," Vaughn tried again, "at least examine the evidence. These papers show Montgomery plans to illegally divert water that hundreds of families depend on." "That's for the courts to decide," the officer replied. "My duty is to bring you in." As they were led to horses, Sophia stumbled deliberately, falling against her bedroll. In the moment of confusion, Vaughn saw her slip the most damning document into her boot. The rest of the satchel was seized as evidence. They rode under heavy guard throughout the day, backtracking through Shadow Canyon toward the main road to Denver. Vaughn studied their captors, noting their formations and routines, searching for any opportunity to escape. Late afternoon brought them to a cavalry way station where they would camp for the night. As they dismounted, the lieutenant received a message from a rider, his expression changing as he read it. "Secure the prisoners in separate buildings," he ordered. "Double the guard tonight." Sophia was led to a small storage shed, while Vaughn found himself locked in a tack room, his hands still bound. Through a small window, he could see mounted patrols circling the station. Escape seemed impossible. Hours passed. Vaughn tested his bindings repeatedly, rubbing them against a nail protruding from the wall, making slow progress. Night had fully fallen when he heard the soft click of the door latch. A young cavalry private entered with a tray of food. "Keep quiet," he whispered, setting down the tray and drawing a knife. "I'm from Cooper's Mill. My family's farm would be ruined by Montgomery's dam." As the private cut Vaughn's bindings, he explained, "Word's spreading about what Montgomery plans. Half the troop doesn't believe you're criminals, but we're under orders." "How did you hear about the dam?" Vaughn asked, rubbing circulation back into his wrists. "Telegram came through about the water rights scheme. Montgomery's been buying up officials, but he couldn't buy everyone." The private glanced nervously toward the door. "Miss Sterling is being moved at midnight, separate transport to Denver. They're afraid you'll try something together." "I need to reach her," Vaughn said urgently. "Can you get me to the storage shed?" The private hesitated, then nodded. "During shift change. 10 minutes. But after that, you're on your own." When the moment came, Vaughn slipped through shadows between buildings, narrowly avoiding patrols. The storage shed stood at the compound's edge, a single guard posted outside. The private approached the guard with a message, drawing him away just long enough for Vaughn to slip inside. Sophia gasped as he appeared, then rushed into his arms. "I thought they'd already taken you to Denver," she whispered against his chest. "We haven't much time," Vaughn said, examining her bindings before cutting them with the knife the private had provided. "They're moving you at midnight." She reached into her boot, withdrawing the folded document. "I saved Montgomery's letter to the judge. It proves the bribery at least." "Listen carefully," Vaughn said, outlining his plan. There's a sympathetic private who'll help us get horses. We'll have maybe 5 minutes before they realize we're gone. Sophia's fingers tightened around his. If we're caught again, then we face it together, he finished. But I'm not letting Montgomery win without a fight. Their eyes held for a long moment before Sophia rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his. A kiss born of fear and hope and something deeper neither dared name. For luck, she whispered as she pulled away. The escape unfolded in a blur of tension. The private creating a distraction with a false alarm at the opposite end of the compound. 2 horses waiting behind the storage shed, and then a desperate gallop into the darkness as shouts of discovery rose behind them. They rode hard through the night, taking forest paths too narrow for cavalry pursuit. By dawn, they had gained considerable distance, but Vaughn knew the chase would intensify once daylight came. We can't go to Pine Junction or Denver now, he said as they paused to rest the horses. They'll be watching both. Then where? Sophia asked, exhaustion evident in her voice. Vaughn studied the eastern horizon thoughtfully. There's someone who can help us. Samuel Jenkins, retired judge who mentored Wallace. Lives in a cabin near Serpent Ridge, about 30 miles northeast. Can he be trusted? He practically raised me after my parents died, Vaughn said. If anyone will listen without prejudice, it's him. As they prepared to ride again, distant hoofbeats confirmed their pursuers had picked up their trail. The race to Serpent Ridge had begun. Judge Samuel Jenkins's cabin perched on a forested hillside overlooking a small lake, smoke rising lazily from its stone chimney. The elderly man who emerged at their approach held a shotgun with the comfortable familiarity of someone who'd used it many times. That's far enough, he called, then squinted in recognition. Vaughn? That you, boy? It's me, Judge, Vaughn answered, dismounting slowly. We need your help. The judge lowered his weapon as they approached, his weathered face registering both pleasure and concern. The territorial telegraph's been humming about you too. Murder and theft, they're saying. False accusations, Sophia said firmly. We have proof of corruption that powerful men want suppressed. Jenkins studied her with shrewd eyes. Well, you'd better come in and tell me everything. Can't judge a case without hearing both sides. Inside the rustic cabin, over coffee and a hastily prepared meal, they laid out the entire story. Montgomery's scheme, Sophia's flight, Harker's death, and their arrest and escape. Jenkins examined the saved document with a lawyer's practiced eye. This letter alone is damning, he acknowledged. Shows judicial corruption clear as day. But it's not enough to bring down Montgomery's entire operation. The cavalry has the rest, Vaughn explained. If we're arrested again, those papers will likely disappear. Jenkins stroked his white beard thoughtfully. Montgomery's not just some local tyrant. He has connections all the way to Washington. Even with evidence, this won't be easy. Then what can we do? Sophia asked, desperation edging her voice. The old judge rose and moved to a roll-top desk in the corner. I maintain certain relationships after retirement. People who owe me favors across the territory. He began writing rapidly. First, we need these allegations in a newspaper that Montgomery doesn't control. The Rocky Mountain Herald, Vaughn suggested. Editor's been critical of land grabs before. Exactly, Jenkins nodded. Second, we need copies of your evidence distributed to multiple officials simultaneously, so no single person can suppress it. As he outlined his strategy, the sound of approaching riders brought them all to alert attention. Jenkins moved to the window, then relaxed. It's Ellis from the telegraph office, he said. Friend, not foe. The newcomer brought surprising news. Montgomery had suffered a stroke upon learning of their escape. His son had taken charge of his affairs, and, eager to establish his own authority, had increased the bounty on their capture to $1,000 each. Half the territory's looking for you now, Ellis warned. Bounty hunters, not just cavalry. Then we accelerate our plan, Jenkins decided. Ellis, I need these messages sent immediately to these recipients. He handed over several sealed envelopes. Vaughn, you and Miss Sterling should separate. No, Vaughn said firmly. We stay together. Sophia touched his arm. He's right, Vaughn. If we're together, they only need to find one of us to capture both. The logic was sound, but the thought of Sophia facing further danger alone tore at Vaughn's heart. She had become more than just a woman he was protecting. In their short time together, she had awakened feelings he'd thought buried with Emma. I'll take Miss Sterling to my sisters in Black Hawk, Jenkins offered. She'll be safe there while you deliver copies of our evidence to Judge Wallace directly. The plan was strategically sound, but as they prepared to part ways, Vaughn pulled Sophia aside. I'll find you when this is over, he promised, his voice low and intense. Whatever happens. I know, she whispered, her fingers intertwining with his. Be careful, Vaughn. Montgomery's son has more to prove than his father ever did. Their goodbye was brief but charged with unspoken emotion. As Sophia departed with Jenkins, Vaughn felt as though a piece of himself left with her, a sensation both unfamiliar and inevitable. The journey to Pine Junction took Vaughn through increasingly dangerous territory. Twice, he spotted search parties and was forced to hide for hours in uncomfortable positions. Once, he narrowly escaped a group of bounty hunters who had stopped at the same stream to water their horses. Judge Wallace's home stood on the outskirts of town, a modest two-story structure surrounded by cottonwoods. Approaching after nightfall, Vaughn was surprised to find the house dark and seemingly empty. Caution made him circle the property before approaching. Through a back window, he glimpsed overturned furniture and signs of struggle. The judge was gone, taken, fled, or worse. A soft noise from the stable drew his attention. Moving silently, revolver ready, Vaughn discovered not an assailant but the judge's housekeeper hiding among the hay bales. They came for him yesterday, she whispered after he identified himself. Men working for young Mr. Montgomery. Said the judge was wanted for questioning about abuses of power. Where did they take him? Vaughn pressed. Denver, I think. But one man said something about the mine when they thought I couldn't hear. The Silver Queen mine, Montgomery's largest holding, was notorious for harsh conditions and isolation. If they'd taken Wallace there, it suggested they wanted him far from legal processes and witnesses. Vaughn left copies of the evidence with the housekeeper, instructing her to deliver them to the town sheriff and telegraph office if he didn't return within 3 days. Then he set off toward the mountains where the Silver Queen carved its tunnels deep into the earth. The mine lay 2 days' hard ride from Pine Junction. As Vaughn approached, he studied its operations from a ridgeline through his field glass. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, unusual for even the largest mining operations. Something valuable or dangerous was clearly being protected. Infiltrating the complex would be impossible alone. Vaughn needed leverage or distraction. The answer came as he observed the changing of shifts. Miners emerging exhausted from the tunnels, while fresh workers descended. Many were Chinese laborers, their treatment visibly worse than the white miners. Following one group to their segregated camp, Vaughn discovered deplorable conditions and simmering resentment. Here he might find allies with intimate knowledge of the mine's layout. Li Wei, the unofficial leader of the Chinese workers, initially regarded Vaughn with suspicion. But when Vaughn explained Montgomery's water diversion scheme, which would destroy the small settlement where many of the miners' families lived, the man's attitude shifted. We have seen men taken into the old Western Tunnel, Li Wei confirmed. One matching your judge's description 2 nights ago. That section was closed last year after a collapse, but they cleared it recently. No mining happens there. With Li Wei's help, Vaughn formulated a plan. During the next shift change, he would enter with the Chinese workers, using borrowed clothes and a sediment-smeared face as disguise. Li Wei would guide him to the Western Tunnel before creating a distraction in the main shaft. The plan proceeded smoothly until they reached the guarded entrance to the Western Tunnel. 2 armed men blocked their path, checking each passing worker carefully. New inspection procedure, one guard explained to the shift foreman. Mr. Montgomery's orders after the theft incident. Li Wei squeezed Vaughn's arm in warning. They hadn't anticipated this security measure. As the line of workers moved forward, Vaughn's disguise would soon be tested against close scrutiny. Just as Vaughn prepared to abandon the approach, shouts erupted from the main tunnel. Miners came running, yelling about a support beam cracking. The guards, momentarily distracted, turned toward the commotion. Vaughn seized the opportunity, slipping past them into the Western Tunnel. Behind him, he heard Li Wei's voice among those urging the guards to help with the emergency. The tunnel narrowed as he proceeded, old support timbers groaning overhead. After several hundred yards, it opened into a small chamber where crates of explosives were stored, and where Judge Wallace sat bound to a chair, his face bruised but his eyes alert. Young, the judge whispered hoarsely as Vaughn cut his bindings. How did you? No time, Vaughn interrupted. Can you walk? Wallace nodded, struggling to his feet. Montgomery's son interrogated me personally. Wanted to know who had evidence against his father. I told him nothing. We need to move quickly, Vaughn urged. There's another exit Lee Wei told me about. Maintenance shaft that emerges a quarter-mile from the main entrance. They had just located the narrow shaft when voices echoed from the tunnel behind them. Discovery had come sooner than expected. Up you go, Vaughn said, helping the weakened judge into the shaft. I'll be right behind you. But as Wallace began his ascent, the first guard appeared at the chamber entrance. Vaughn fired a warning shot that sent the man ducking for cover, buying precious seconds for the judge to climb higher. Go, Vaughn shouted up the shaft. Get to Pine Junction. Jenkins has copies of the evidence. More guards appeared, forcing Vaughn into a desperate firefight. He managed to hold them off long enough for Wallace to escape, but his position grew increasingly untenable as ammunition dwindled. The decision came with clarity. He could die here or surrender, and perhaps live to fight another day. When his revolver clicked empty, Vaughn raised his hands. I'm coming out, he called. Don't shoot. For guards took him roughly into custody. Rather than killing him immediately, they escorted him to the mine office where a well-dressed young man waited. Victor Montgomery, the banker's son and now acting head of his empire. Mr. Young, Victor said with cold courtesy, you've caused my family considerable inconvenience. Stealing water rights from hundreds of families is more than an inconvenience, Vaughn replied, earning a blow from one of the guards. Victor studied him with clinical detachment. My father built something magnificent from wilderness. I won't let you and that thieving woman destroy it. He nodded to the guards. Take him to Denver. My father will want the pleasure of seeing him stand trial. The journey to Denver passed in uncomfortable silence, Vaughn securely bound in a prison wagon. His mind, however, raced with possibilities. Judge Wallace had escaped with knowledge of Montgomery's crimes. Sophia remained free with evidence. The newspaper story might already be circulating. His capture might not mean defeat. It could be the very thing that brought Montgomery's schemes into public view. Denver's territorial prison stood like a medieval fortress at the city's edge. As Vaughn was processed and locked in a cell, he noted the unusual number of Montgomery Mining Company guards supplementing the regular prison staff. You've caused quite a stir, Young, the warden commented during inspection. Had 3 federal marshals asking about you this morning. Hope flared briefly until the warden continued. Of course, Mr. Montgomery's attorneys shooed them away. Said jurisdiction was clearly territorial, not federal. Days passed in monotonous confinement. Vaughn learned from snippets of guard conversation that Judge Wallace had indeed reached Pine Junction safely, but that Montgomery's influence had limited the immediate impact of his testimony. Most concerning were rumors about Sophia, supposedly sighted in 4 different towns simultaneously, with bounty hunters converging on each location. On his 5th day of imprisonment, Vaughn received an unexpected visitor, Victor Montgomery himself, impeccably dressed and flanked by attorneys. I've come to make you an offer, Mr. Young, Victor said without preamble. Your freedom in exchange for information about Sophia Sterling's whereabouts and the return of all stolen documents. I don't know where she is, Vaughn answered truthfully, and I wouldn't tell you if I did. Victor's practiced smile never reached his eyes. Perhaps you misunderstand your situation. The trial is a formality. We own the judge who will hear your case. Then why bother with an offer? Efficiency, Victor replied. A public trial, however predetermined, creates records and attention. My father prefers cleaner resolutions. Vaughn leaned forward. Your father's dam would destroy livelihoods across 3 counties. Does that matter to you at all? Something flickered across Victor's face. Doubt, perhaps, or conscience not entirely crushed by ambition. Progress requires sacrifice, Mr. Young. The mines employ hundreds more than those small ranches ever could. It's not progress when the many sacrifice for the few, Vaughn countered. Your father could have proposed fair water rights agreements, compensated displaced families. Instead, he chose theft and murder. The younger Montgomery stood abruptly. Your trial begins tomorrow. Consider my offer until then. After Victor's departure, Vaughn was returned to his cell with growing unease. A rigged trial starting so quickly suggested the Montgomerys were worried. Perhaps public opinion was turning against them. That night, As Vaughn contemplated his dwindling options, a prison guard approached his cell. "Dinner," the man announced, sliding a tray through the slot. Vaughn noticed immediately this wasn't the usual guard, nor the usual mealtime. As he took the tray, the guard whispered, "Check under the bread. Friend of Jenkins." Beneath the stale bread lay a folded note and a small lockpick. The note, in unfamiliar handwriting, was brief. "Trial postponed by federal intervention. Herald published expose this morning. Be ready at midnight. Follow tunnel beneath East Cell Block." Hope surged through Vaughn for the first time in days. The newspaper article meant their evidence was reaching the public. Federal intervention suggested Montgomery's influence had limits. At midnight precisely, his cell door clicked open. The same guard appeared, now openly helping. "Hurry," he urged. "Shift change in 10 minutes." They moved silently through darkened corridors, avoiding the regular patrol routes the guard had memorized. Reaching the East Cell Block's maintenance room, the guard revealed a trapdoor beneath shelving. "Drainage tunnel," he explained. "Follows Cherry Creek for half a mile. Someone's waiting at the outlet." Vaughn clasped the man's hand gratefully. "Why risk yourself for me? My brother's ranch sits on White Rock River," the guard replied simply. "And that Herald article mentioned you by name as fighting to save it." The tunnel was narrow and foul, forcing Vaughn to crouch as he splashed through ankle-deep water. After what seemed an eternity, he saw moonlight reflecting on water ahead. Emerging cautiously, Vaughn found himself beneath a bridge where a hooded figure waited with horses. "You look terrible," came a familiar voice as the figure lowered its hood. "Sophia," he breathed, relief washing through him as she stepped into his arms. Their embrace was brief but powerful, both reluctant to let go when they finally separated. "The newspaper article worked better than we hoped," Sophia explained as they mounted. "Public outrage forced federal marshals to intervene. Montgomery's son has been trying to destroy every copy in Denver." "What about the judge?" "Wallace, testifying to a federal commission as we speak," she said with satisfaction. "Jenkins's connections reached higher than Montgomery's, it seems." They rode through the night toward the foothills, avoiding main roads. By dawn, they had reached a small hunting cabin where Jenkins awaited them. "You've become quite the celebrity, Young," the old judge greeted him, handing over a newspaper. The headline shouted, "Water Theft Conspiracy Exposed. Rancher and Governess Reveal Banker's Plot." The article detailed Montgomery's scheme and the evidence against him, naming Vaughn and Sophia as courageous whistleblowers unjustly accused of crimes to silence them. "Public sentiment has turned decisively," Jenkins explained. "Montgomery suffered a second stroke after seeing this. His son is scrambling to distance himself from the scheme, claiming ignorance." "Will it be enough?" Vaughn asked. "Montgomery still has powerful friends. The governor can't ignore federal interest," Jenkins replied, "especially with an election year approaching." Arrest warrants were issued this morning for several of Montgomery's associates, including the false Deputy Harker, though I understand that particular warrant is moot. Sophia's expression darkened at the reminder of the man she'd killed. Vaughn took her hand gently, a gesture not lost on Jenkins. "You're not safe yet," the old judge cautioned. "The Montgomerys still have resources and desperate men on their payroll. You'll need to remain hidden until the federal case is built." "For how long?" Sophia asked. "Weeks, possibly months," Jenkins admitted. "I've arranged a place where nobody would think to look for either of you." Jenkins's safe place proved to be a remote homestead high in the mountains, accessible only by a single winding trail. Its elderly owners, friends from Jenkins's early days as a circuit judge, had departed for an extended visit to relatives in California, leaving the property vacant. "Nobody will look for a wanted couple playing house in a mountain paradise," Jenkins had reasoned. And paradise it was, a sturdy cabin beside a clear mountain lake, surrounded by pine forest and meadows bright with wildflowers. In different circumstances, it might have been idyllic. Instead, the first weeks passed in tense vigilance. Vaughn established security routines, checking the trail for signs of visitors, while Sophia maintained the cabin and tended the small garden. They lived as cautious strangers sharing space, their growing attraction complicated by uncertainty and danger. As spring deepened into summer, however, their vigilance gradually softened. News arrived periodically through trusted messengers. Montgomery's health declining further, federal indictments being prepared, witnesses coming forward with additional evidence of corruption. With each passing day of safety, Vaughn and Sophia found themselves settling into a rhythm of shared life. Morning coffee on the porch, watching sunrise on the mountains. Afternoon work maintaining the homestead. Evening conversations beside the fire that stretched longer with each passing night. "Do you miss your ranch?" Sophia asked one evening as they sat watching stars emerge above the lake. "Parts of it," Vaughn admitted. "The open grassland. My horses. The feeling of building something lasting." He glanced at her profile, silvered by moonlight. "But I'm finding unexpected compensations in exile." She smiled, the expression transforming her face in ways that increasingly captivated him. "I've never stayed in one place long enough to miss it. Boston, then schools in 3 different states, then Denver. Always moving on before putting down roots. And now, what will you do when this is over?" The question hung between them, laden with unspoken possibilities. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "Teaching seems small after everything that's happened." She met his eyes directly. "What about you? Back to your ranch?" "If it's still there," he nodded. "Though it might need rebuilding after such neglect." "Perhaps," Sophia began, then hesitated. "Perhaps you'll need help with that rebuilding." The implication in her words sent Vaughn's heart racing. Before he could respond, however, the distant sound of hoofbeats brought both to alert attention. They extinguished lights and took defensive positions, rifles ready. No visitors were expected for days. The rider approached slowly, a single figure whose relaxed posture suggested neither threat nor urgency. When he reached the clearing, moonlight revealed Jenkins's messenger, the sympathetic prison guard who had helped Vaughn escape. "Good news," he called, recognizing their defensive posture. "Federal marshals have arrested Victor Montgomery and 3 judges. The old man died 2 days ago. It's over." The announcement hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot, stunning in its finality after months of tension. "All charges against you both have been dropped," the messenger continued, dismounting. "The territorial governor signed the papers himself this morning. You're free to go home." Freedom. The word echoed between them as they absorbed its implications. No more hiding. No more looking over shoulders. Return to normal life. But what was normal now? For Vaughn, could the solitary existence at Willow Creek ever feel complete again? For Sophia, where was home when you'd been running most of your life? They invited the messenger to stay the night, plying him with questions about developments in their absence. Montgomery's water scheme had been permanently halted. The documents Sophia had stolen had revealed corruption extending far beyond water rights, railroad kickbacks, mining claim manipulation, voter intimidation. "The Herald's calling you 2 territorial heroes," the messenger chuckled. "There's talk of a book deal from some Eastern publisher." Later, after their guest had retired to the spare room, Vaughn and Sophia found themselves alone on the porch, the reality of their situation settling around them like evening mist. "So," Vaughn said quietly, "tomorrow we can leave." "Yes," Sophia nodded, her eyes fixed on the distant mountains. "Back to our separate lives." The thought created a hollow feeling in Vaughn's chest that no victory over Montgomery could fill. These months in hiding had changed something fundamental between them. Friendship deepening into affection, affection blossoming into something neither had dared name. "What if I don't want separate lives?" he asked, the words emerging before he could reconsider. Sophia turned to him, eyes wide. "What are you saying, Vaughn?" He took her hands in his, forcing himself to continue despite the risk of rejection. "I'm saying that going back to Willow Creek alone feels wrong now. I'm saying that somehow, in the middle of all this danger and hiding, I found myself falling in love with you." Tears gathered in Sophia's eyes, catching the moonlight. "We've known each other less than 4 months. And in that time, we've faced death together, saved each other's lives, shared more truth than most couples discover in years," Vaughn countered. "I know your courage, your principles, your heart. What more do I need to know?" She stepped closer, one hand rising to touch his face. "And what about your ranch? Your solitary life? I'm a city woman with no skills for frontier living." "You've managed this homestead beautifully," he smiled. "Besides, the ranch will need rebuilding. We could make it something new, something ours, not just mine." "Are you asking me to marry you, Vaughn Young?" Sophia whispered, hope and uncertainty mingled in her voice. "I am," he answered simply. "Not because we need each other for protection anymore, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it." For a moment that stretched into eternity, Sophia was silent. Then she closed the distance between them, her lips meeting his in an answer more eloquent than words. "Yes," she breathed when they finally parted. "Yes, I will marry you." In that moment, on a moonlit porch in the Colorado mountains, the dangers they had faced receded into memory. Whatever challenges awaited them at Willow Creek Ranch, they would face them together. Willow Creek Ranch, Colorado Territory, autumn 1875. The ranch house gleamed with fresh whitewash in the October sunshine, smoke curling from its chimney into the crisp mountain air. New outbuildings stood where the old ones had weathered away during Vaughn's absence, and the corral held twice the horses it once had. On the wide front porch, rocking chairs sat side by side, overlooking the valley where White Rock River flowed strong and clear, its waters still belonging to the families who had worked this land for generations. Inside, Sophia arranged wildflowers in a vase on the dining table, her simple calico dress a far cry from the formal governess attire she'd worn when fleeing Denver. A gold band gleamed on her finger, matching the one Vaughn wore as he repaired tack in the corner. "Riders coming," he noted, glancing through the window. "Looks like the Paytons and Harises." Sophia smiled, setting out additional cups for coffee. Right on time for the celebration. The months since their return had been filled with rebuilding, not just the ranch's structures, but relationships with neighboring families and the community's trust and justice after Montgomery's corruption had been exposed. Today marked the official formation of the White Rock Water Cooperative, ensuring no single interest could ever again threaten the resource they all depended on. The ranch house would host the signing ceremony, followed by a celebration that would likely continue well into evening. As wagons and riders began arriving, Vaughn joined Sophia on the porch, his arms sliding naturally around her waist. "Having regrets about frontier life, Mrs. Young?" he teased gently, noting how she'd come alive organizing this gathering. Sophia leaned into his embrace, watching families dismount in the yard. "None whatsoever, Mr. Young. Though I still maintain we need a proper school for these children." "Already discussing that with the cooperative board," Vaughn assured her. "We've earmarked land by the crossroads, and 3 families have pledged lumber. And they'll need a teacher," Sophia mused, her expression thoughtful. Vaughn turned to face her fully. "Is that something you'd want? To teach again?" "Perhaps," she nodded. "But not immediately. We may have other priorities next spring." It took a moment for her meaning to register. When it did, Vaughn's expression transformed from confusion to wonder. "Are you certain?" he whispered, hands gentle on her shoulders. Sophia nodded, eyes bright with joy and nervous anticipation. "Dr. Collins confirmed it yesterday. Don't tell anyone," she whispered. The rancher listened, and was shaken by overwhelming happiness that rendered him momentarily speechless. Then he gathered her into his arms, heedless of approaching guests, and kissed her with all the love that had grown between them since that snowy night when a desperate stranger had appeared on his doorstep. "Our secret," he promised when they parted, both laughing at the good-natured whistles from arriving neighbors. As they turned to welcome their guests, Vaughn reflected on how completely his life had transformed in less than a year. The solitary rancher had found not just a partner, but a purpose larger than himself, protecting a community's future, building justice where corruption had reigned, creating a family where once there had been only lonely silence. Sophia squeezed his hand as if reading his thoughts, her smile containing promises of all they would build together in the years ahead. Whatever challenges awaited them, they would face them as they had faced Montgomery's threats, with courage, determination, and the unshakable strength of their love. In the clear autumn light, Willow Creek Ranch stood as a testament to battles won and a future secured, not just for its owners, but for all who called this valley home.